I think even if he doesn't win the job over Watson, Mike, I think he is somebody who should prepare to play, and he should prepare to play a lot. Because if you look at Watson, his time in Cleveland, after a while, it's just not a coincidence. It's just something that, he's been through so many injuries the last 3 to 4 years. If you just list the Deshaun Watson injuries, it would seem like his body is like 45 years old.
The Cleveland Browns already know who their starting quarterback is. They made the decision weeks ago. The competition is still happening. The reps are still being counted. The press conferences are still diplomatic. But inside that building, on that practice field, in the body language of every person who matters, the answer is already there. And it's not Deshaun Watson. Here's what makes this strange. 2 months ago, a beat reporter with direct access to this organization, someone who covers this team every single day, said if she had to name a starter today, she'd give it to Watson. No hesitation. That wasn't ignorance. That was the consensus. Watson had the experience. Watson had the contract. Watson had the name. The assumption was that Shedeur Sanders would need time, would need reps, would need a full training camp just to catch up. And then something happened at mandatory minicamp that nobody on the national level really stopped to explain. By the end of this, you're going to see what I saw. One specific moment, one gesture, one piece of body language from Shedeur Sanders that tells you more about where this competition stands than any depth chart, any press conference, or any stat line ever could. When you see it, you'll understand why Todd Monken didn't shut this thing down, and why Deshaun Watson's time in Cleveland may already be over, even if his name is still on the roster.
And guess what? The locker room. The players in the locker room, they see it too. He doing his thing. And Mary Kay started out the gate. If I was Todd Monken, I'll go ahead and name Deshaun Watson the starting quarterback. Wow. 2 months ago, they haven't even hit the field because they knew Deshaun Watson had the most experience and he'll pick up the offense quicker than Shedeur Sanders. But guess what? What's shocking is that Shedeur Sanders knew the offense and he was making the throws. You know when Shedeur Sanders is in a groove, he showed it. He put that wrist up, right? Yeah. I tell you what, check this out. Pay.
Think about what this franchise has been carrying, not in the abstract, in the specific. Picture the third quarter of the 2023 season when Cleveland, a team that mortgaged 3 years of draft capital, paid $230 million guaranteed to a quarterback coming off an 11-game suspension, realized in real time that the investment wasn't working, that Deshaun Watson wasn't the same player who left Houston. The organization absorbed that quietly. The fans absorbed it loudly. And what nobody talks about is what that kind of wound does to a front office's psychology. When you've made a mistake that large, one that is public, documented, and impossible to undo, you don't just move on. You don't wake up the next morning with fresh eyes. You carry the posture of that decision into every room you walk into. Andrew Berry has been carrying it. Every press conference, every draft table, every time someone asks him about the quarterback position, which is every single day. And here's the thing about wounds that haven't healed. They change how you speak. They change what you reach for. They change which words feel safe and which ones feel like a liability. Last week, Andrew Berry stopped reaching for safe words, at least when the subject was Shedeur Sanders.
And when you listen to their press conference, they tell you Shedeur Sanders came a long way. Why? Because he had to learn a new offense. Once he learned that new offense, and then they saw it on the field doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, yeah, you got to close that gap. He closed it big time because many people thought that Deshaun Watson was going to walk away with it because of his experience. And only thing he had to show was he.
That's the wound the Browns have been carrying since 2022. Not just the losses, not just the wasted draft capital, but the realization, slow and painful, that the most expensive quarterback decision in NFL history might have already expired. And now, a 22-year-old from Colorado is standing on their practice field, working quietly, staying in Cleveland all offseason, studying a new offense, asking a simple question with his performance: what if you don't need Watson at all? Here's what the ESPN Cleveland tracker showed during OTAs and mandatory minicamp. Shedeur Sanders' completion percentage wasn't just competitive, it was consistent. Not one hot day and two quiet ones. Not the kind of numbers that flatter a quarterback because the defense is playing off. Consistent, accurate, fast release. The kind of output that shows a player has internalized an offense, not just memorized plays, but understood the why behind them. And then there's the wrist. This is the part nobody talked about on the major platforms. Shedeur Sanders has a signature celebration. He throws his wrist up, not after touchdowns, not after highlight plays. He does that after touchdowns, yes, but this minicamp, he started doing it after something smaller, something more revealing. A completion on 3rd and 6, a first down in the red zone, a short crossing route that moved the chains. He threw that wrist up after a 5-yard gain. That is not a player going through the motions of a competition. That is a player who has already decided the competition is over. Todd Monken, the head coach, came out of minicamp and said something that got read as a routine diplomatic non-answer.
Because they knew Deshaun Watson had the most experience and he'll pick up the offense quicker than Shedeur Sanders. But guess what? What shocked them is that Shedeur Sanders knew the offense and he was making the throws. You know when Shedeur Sanders is in a groove, he showed it. He put that wrist up, right? Yeah. I tell you what, check this out. Pay.
He said every quarterback in that room deserved a continued opportunity because they practiced so well he couldn't close the door on anyone. That sounds neutral. It sounds like a coach protecting his process. But read it again. He didn't say Watson proved himself. He didn't say the veterans separated himself. He said every quarterback deserved a chance because of how well they performed. Every quarterback, including the rookie, including the one who came into this offseason with no guarantees and a learning curve everyone assumed would slow him down. That's not a compliment to Watson. That's Monken telegraphing that Sanders erased any separation Watson was supposed to have. Shedeur Sanders didn't leave Cleveland this offseason. That fact has been mentioned in passing. But sit with it. He stayed. He worked directly with the offensive coordinator. He built rapport with the quarterback coach. He spent every available day learning the system. Watson, a veteran who has run NFL offenses for a decade, was supposed to have a natural advantage in absorbing a new scheme. But the coaching staff has gone out of their way to note how far Sanders has come. Not that Watson was ahead, but that Sanders closed the gap. When an organization is validating the challenger's growth, they are preparing the room for the challenger to win. The completion tracker, the deep ball attempts, the accuracy numbers, the release time. Sanders was not just keeping up, he was making the throws that Watson was supposed to own. The vertical, the intermediate, the quick read into tight windows. All of it showing up on the tracker that ESPN Cleveland kept publishing, week after week, a document of a young quarterback quietly dismantling every assumption people had made about his readiness. Stats don't start the story, they close it. And this story was already heading somewhere before the numbers confirmed it.
The quarterback competition will continue, according to the head coach, Todd Monken. Todd Monken said each of one of these quarterbacks deserve an opportunity because they practice so good during the mandatory minicamp that he will allow them to continue to battle for QB1 for the Cleveland Browns in 2026. Now, when you look at Deshaun Watson, everything that's been said about his practice during OTAs.
When was the last time a franchise publicly validated a rookie quarterback in a competition against a $230 million veteran and the veteran still won the job? Think about that. What you're watching in Cleveland right now is not a quarterback competition. It's an identity crisis playing out in real time, and Deshaun Watson is the one whose identity is under threat. This is what psychologists call an identity threat, when a person's entire self-concept, Everything they believe about who they are, what they're capable of, what they've earned, is suddenly contingent on an outcome they can't fully control. The body responds before the brain has time to process it. Watson has been a franchise quarterback since college. He was that at Clemson, he was that in Houston, he was supposed to be that in Cleveland. That's not just a job title. That's a psychological architecture, a way of organizing his entire relationship to football. Now he's in a competition with a rookie, in public, and the rookie is throwing his wrist up after 5-yard gains. What does that do to a person? The pressure signature for Watson right now is internal. He's not getting louder. He's not deflecting to teammates. He's being careful and measured, all the right things. But the insider commentary is telling. Multiple people with access to those practices are saying the same thing in different words. He looks healthy, but he's still throwing like it's 2024. That is a pressure signature. When a player's mechanics revert under competition, not because they're hurt, but because the situation has activated old patterns, that's the brain protecting itself. That's someone throwing with memory instead of intention. Shedeur Sanders, on the other hand, is showing a completely different cognitive profile. He's demonstrating what behavioral scientists call an internal locus of control, the belief that the outcome is his to determine. The wrist after the short completion isn't arrogance, it's a feedback loop. He's reinforcing his own confidence in real time, telling his nervous system, in front of the coaching staff, in front of Watson, I belong here. I've already decided this. Look at the organization's psychology too. When front offices are genuinely committed to a veteran, they say things like, he's our guy, period. They don't leave doors open. They don't validate the backup's growth at press conferences. They don't give beat reporters quotes about how far the young kid has come. The Browns' public language about this competition is hedge behavior. Every statement is balanced. Every compliment to Sanders is followed by a non-dismissal of Watson. That is not the language of an organization that is decided on the veteran. That is the language of an organization that is decided on the younger player and is managing the transition carefully enough that a $230 million quarterback doesn't make things difficult on the way out. Think about it from Todd Monken's point of view for a second. He's a play caller. He's an offensive mind. He's been given a better offensive line than this franchise has had in years, better receivers, real weapons. And he has a young quarterback who spent his entire offseason learning his system, is throwing with accuracy, is operating within the offense, and is showing up to mandatory minicamp so locked in that he's wrist up after a 5-yard completion. Now, he also has Deshaun Watson, who is, by all accounts, finally healthy, but whose body, by the assessment of people who cover the league, has the wear pattern of someone 15 years older, and who is still throwing, according to those who watched it, like he did in 2024. If you're Monken, if this is your offense, your season, your legacy, which one do you build around? The Browns are communicating their decision. They just aren't announcing it. Depth chart positioning hasn't changed yet, but that's the last thing that moves. Pay attention to what moved first.
Beat reporters' access. The reporters covering this team most closely have been writing about Sanders' growth, Sanders' command of the offense, Sanders' relationship with the coaching staff. The Watson coverage has been about his health. That's the frame the organization handed them. Sanders gets a narrative. Watson gets a medical update. The social media signal is in the minicamp footage. Who is the camera finding? Whose reps are getting highlighted? If you watch the content the Browns are distributing, not the national coverage, the team's own content, you see where their excitement lives. The coach's press conference language is the clearest signal of all. When Todd Monken was asked about the competition, he did not say Watson was ahead. He said everyone performed well enough to continue. He said Sanders came a long way. When a head coach goes out of his way to validate the challenger's learning curve in the same breath as acknowledging the veteran's experience, he is not protecting a competition, he is preparing a fan base. And the financial structure behind all of this is its own statement. Watson's contract is extraordinary. The guaranteed money is already paid. That means the Browns have no financial reason to avoid playing Watson if Watson is their best option. The only reason to genuinely entertain a rookie over a $230 million commitment is if the rookie is genuinely winning.
When Monken says both quarterbacks deserved a chance to continue, what he's actually saying is, we didn't see what we needed from Watson, and we saw more from Sanders than we expected. That's not a compliment to the process, that's a signal. But to understand why this matters, we have to go back to February, when Shedeur Sanders chose to stay in Cleveland instead of going home. He could have gone anywhere, he'd just been drafted, he had an off-season ahead of him, but he stayed, he worked, he asked questions, he sat in the building. Watson had done this before. Watson knew how to prepare. And yet by the time mandatory minicamp arrived, the coaching staff was more surprised by Sanders than they were reassured by Watson. What does it tell you when the rookie outworked the narrative?
There are 52 other men in that building watching this play out. Football players are perceptive. They notice who gets the first team reps, they notice who the coaches are animated around, they notice whose voice the play caller is responding to on the sideline. And in Cleveland, right now, they're watching a 22-year-old quarterback throw his wrist up after a short completion, not because he's showing off, but because he's so locked in that the joy is involuntary. That energy is contagious, or it's a problem. There is no middle ground in an NFL locker room. The players who want to win in 2026 are watching Shedeur Sanders and making quiet calculations, and those calculations are pushing in one direction. If this competition resolves the way the evidence suggests, if Sanders is the Week 1 starter, the Cleveland Browns are a legitimate wildcard threat. Not a Super Bowl contender, let's be clear about that, but a team with a young quarterback who understands his offense, weapons who can create separation, and an offensive line rebuilt to protect a player willing to stay in the pocket and distribute the ball. That's a functional team. That's a team that can win 10 games if the defense holds. Watson starting and getting hurt again by Week 6, as Florio essentially predicted, means another lost season, another rebuild conversation, another year of the same question. What are the Browns actually doing? The ceiling isn't a guarantee, but the floor is everything. In 3 years, this moment will be one of two things. It will be the scene from the documentary where the camera finds Shedeur Sanders throwing his wrist up at a 5-yard completion during minicamp, the moment where anyone paying attention could see that a new era in Cleveland was beginning. Or it will be a footnote, a cautionary tale about a rookie who looked good in shorts. But here's what I know. The organizations that commit early win more than the ones that manage transitions carefully. The Browns have a chance to commit. The evidence is already pointing at the door. The only question is whether they open it.
The Cleveland Browns already know who their starting quarterback is. They've known since before mandatory minicamp ended. The evidence is in the press conference language, the beat reporter framing, the completion tracker, and a young quarterback celebrating a 5-yard gain like it was the most important throw of his life. Because to him, it was. Because underneath all of it, past the tracker numbers and the injury history and the $230 million shadow, there's a 22-year-old who came to Cleveland and didn't leave, who stayed in an unfamiliar city and learned a new offense and spent every day making himself into something that football people told him he needed time to become. He didn't wait for the moment. He made himself ready before it arrived. And now the organization has to decide if what they saw in that minicamp is real, or if they owe something to the past that hasn't earned it anymore. So here's the question I keep coming back to. Is Shedeur Sanders genuinely winning this competition because he's the better option right now? Or are the Browns managing Deshaun Watson out of the building as carefully as possible to avoid the chaos of cutting him? One of those answers means they found their quarterback. The other means they still haven't. Drop it below. I'll be reading every single one.